So welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Chantal Cook. I'm one of the directors of NALP. Joining us on this webinar, which we're going to be talking about being a costs lawyer. What is that? What does it mean? Can you do it? How do you do it? That's what we'll be finding out about today. So let me welcome the other people on our webinar today. Most importantly is our guest, that's Madeleine Jenness she's head of business at the Association of Costs Lawyers Training. Welcome, Madeleine, and thank you for joining us today. Also like to say hello to Amanda Hamilton, our former CEO and our patron, and also our current CEO, Jane Robson, also joining us on the webinar today. And of course, Nigel, who's our head of marketing, who will be in the background looking after the technical issues, and also on putting any links or whatever into the chat that might be relevant. So you can see he's already putting loads of stuff in there already. So do keep an eye on the chat. And as I mentioned, also pop your questions in the chat as you think of them. So let's get started. So Madeleine, thank you again for joining us. I guess the most obvious question I have to ask you is, what is a costs lawyer?
Thank you for having me, everybody. So a costs lawyer is a specialist regulated lawyer who specialises in the law and practice of costs. They, as you will know, legal costs are legal fees incurred in the cost of legal representation. So, for example, solicitors' fees, charges, disbursements, expenses, and remuneration. And a cost lawyer is the specialist practitioner, a specialist regulated lawyer who deals in either maximising recovery for their client or minimising the amount that the losing party has to pay.
So that sounds like it's a lot to do with contracts and things like that, and can you really cook some nitty-gritty understanding? So what sort of skills and qualifications do you need, therefore, to be a costs lawyer?
So the majority of cost lawyers come from a range of backgrounds. Some of them will have started out as paralegals. As the rules are, you don't need specific qualifications to come onto the qualifying course, but you do need to complete the accredited qualifying course to become a cost lawyer, which is delivered by currently by the Association of Costs Lawyers Training, which is the sole provider of the course, which is recognised by the Cost Lawyer Standards Board, which is a regulator of cost lawyers. Sorry, that was a big mouthful. So that's a 2-year course. And it covers the foundations of civil litigation in the first year, and then the law of practice of costs in the second. So you must complete this course in order to qualify as a cost lawyer, and then you need to complete a period of qualifying experience.
So although it doesn't sound like you have to have a paralegal qualification beforehand, it does sound as though that could actually be very helpful, because you'd have a broad understanding and would kind of help you go through those courses easier and quicker by the sound of it.
Yeah. So very typically, students may have worked as a paralegal in a litigation setting. They may have been a cost draftsman. They may have done a kind of role aligned to costs, so they've worked in a cost team, perhaps as a cost assistant or something like that, and then they decide to take on the challenge of doing the qualifying course to qualify as a cost lawyer.
And that brings me on to the next question, which is, if you've never done any of this before, you haven't worked in this sector, maybe someone listening today goes, gosh, that really appeals to me. How do you get into it then? Do you just have to go straight for a qualification and that's your only route?
We recommend that you're in a role related to costs when you do the course, simply because it brings the subject matter to life. We may have the odd student that isn't and is seeking a role, but the majority of people are working in a cost setting. The thing about cost lawyers is that they work in a variety of settings. So some will be working in solicitors' practices, some will be working in specific cost firms, some work for insurers, the government legal department. We've even seen cost draftsmen working in law centres, sort of law advice centres. So there's a variety of settings where you could look for opportunities to build up your knowledge and your expertise before embarking on the next step.
So get some work experience really, and then to move on and get your qualification and so on seems like the best route forward. So can you give me an idea of kind of what might an average day be like? You know, is this a day, is this kind of a role where things are changing all the time and it's very fast moving, or is it much more of a methodical, detailed orientated role? Kind of give me a sense of the day.
That's a good question. I think it's a role with huge variance, and I know from speaking to students that it's one role where you're kind of uniquely placed because you see lots of different areas of the law, you know, in your work as a cost lawyer. So if you're looking for something that has that kind of variety, then it's probably quite an interesting choice. Cost lawyers have the right of audience under the Legal Services Act, so many spend a lot of time advocating for clients in courts on matters relating to costs.
As you say, variety there is the key, which I think is always nice. I personally like a lot of variety in my day. So that's good to know. So that's good. It gives you a rough idea of kind of what a day is like. From your personal experience, maybe from the cost lawyers that you've spoken to and so on, what do you like best about the role? And what do other people say to you, this is the bit that I really like?
I have to admit that until I started working for the Association of Cost Lawyers Training, it was not a role that I had come across. I knew what a cost draftsman was because I myself had worked as a paralegal, and I had worked for another legal membership body, so I knew a bit about that. But it was not a role that I came across. But it's a really unique role, I think, within the legal world. And I think, you know, for a lot of students, they really see the role as being very important because, you know, the efficiency of legal costs is a key factor in access to justice. So it's a kind of, it's an element of law which has, you know, quite a sort of a, you know, powerful message in the sense in the cost of litigation and access for justice.
Talking about that, does this mean that this is really a role where you've got to be really good with numbers? You know, you need to have done your maths A level or whatever in the past.
You don't need to have done maths A level. We recommend that you at least are qualified to level 3 before coming on the course, and that you have English and maths at GCSE. I think inevitably, if you're interested in numbers, it's probably quite an enjoyable role for you. And you know, the work itself lends itself to that, but it's not an essential.
So before I've got a few other questions I can think of, and obviously we were hoping that other people, if you're listening, you've got some questions, that you'll pop those into the chat as well. But is there anything else that you think it would be really good to let people know about either the association itself or about the role of being a costs lawyer?
I think the important thing to note is that cost lawyers are regulated under the Legal Services Act, and under that act they have a right to conduct litigation and the right to conduct advocacy. So they have rights of audience on matters relating to costs, and they are a regulated profession and subject to a professional code. I think that's a really important thing to note. You know, in becoming a cost lawyer. Can you remind me of the second part of your question, please? Sorry.
Advice, really, if you, any advice, or about the association itself as well.
So the Cost Law Standards Board is the regulatory body, and then the Association of Cost Lawyers is the membership representative body that represents cost lawyers. And then through the ACL, you have opportunities for professional development and representation similar to NALP and other membership bodies performing a similar role.
Generally, do people see being a costs lawyer as a career in itself, or is it sometimes considered a sort of a step to something else? And I know that's a tricky one because obviously some people choose, similar question with paralegals really. I know some people choose very much, this is the career that I want, and other people see it as a kind of a step towards something else. What's the perception and the reality in relation to costs lawyers?
It's quite a complex picture, actually. So if you look at the Register of Cost Lawyers, there are probably about 700 cost lawyers on the roll, but there are many, many more cost draftsmen in the profession. So there was some research a few years ago which estimated that there's between sort of like around 5,000 people doing kind of roles that would be considered cost draftsmen type roles, or roles like that. So there's a lot of people out there in firms doing this type of work, and a sort of a smaller number of cost lawyers proportionally. However, I do know now from several years in the role that you do get people that have used qualification as a cost lawyer to springboard into other areas. So we have people who have done the course who've subsequently gone on to qualify as barristers, or are now attempting the SQE, or are dual qualified, as solicitors as well. Cost draftsmen themselves, many people working in costs are highly experienced cost draftsmen, and are running their own practices, or are leading teams in firms that have both cost lawyers and cost draftsmen in them. And typically in cost teams you do see a mixture of the two, and very often it's not a given that the cost lawyer is the sort of the team head or department lead. Often it's a cost draftsman. So and they will have decades of experience in cost necessarily, but the difference is the qualification and whether or not they're subject to regulation.
So you use the term cost lawyers and cost draftsmen. Is there a difference between the two, and is this to do with the qualification level?
Yes. So a cost lawyer is a regulated lawyer. Cost draftsmen do not hold the cost lawyer professional qualification, and they are unregulated. The difference as well is that cost lawyers are regulated under the Legal Services Act, so they have the right to conduct litigation. They have the right of audience to represent their clients on matters relating to costs. Cost draftsmen can appear in court, but they do so as a solicitor's temporary employee, and there's quite a lot now of sort of contemporary case law around that. There was a big case last year where a bill was struck out because there were things in the bill that the cost judge who decided on the case reported the solicitor to the SRA and said that had the bill been prepared by a cost lawyer, they would have been also reported to their regulator, but the bill had been prepared by a cost draftsman.
Now, it doesn't sound like there's a huge number of people working in this sector. So does that mean there's not a lot of opportunities, or does it actually mean the opposite, which is there are a lot of opportunities and perhaps not enough qualified people?
I think it's probably the latter. I mean, there's certainly lots of jobs out there, and they appear as all sorts of different things. So some might be, described as a paralegal type role in litigation settings. I've seen, roles described as cost assistant, cost consultant, law and cost draftsman, legal cost draftsman, trainee cost draftsman. There's a huge variety of work available out there.
And I guess the key here is, because I know sometimes with the paralegal roles, they're not always described as a paralegal, and yet technically that's exactly what they are.
Exactly.
So you've got to be quite clever at recognizing it. Is that similar with the cost lawyers, or is that word costs going to be the thing that's going to give it away for you?
So costs, cost lawyer, is a title in itself, because it's a regulated profession. But if you actually look at the kind of the roles that could lead to that, essentially, you could probably define them as paralegal type roles, and they'll probably have costs in the title somewhere. But it's worth looking at the profile of students that we have who come on the course. Many of them will have been paralegals, and the variance in job titles is huge. And very often it's something like litigation paralegal or court of protection paralegal, or something like that. Not necessarily with the word cost in it, but the actual day-to-day of what they've been doing. They've been dealing with costs.
So it really is a case of you kind of have to, it's just a shame, isn't it, when you can't put a search term in and it pings everything up for
Mm.
you, because that would make life so much easier. But as you
Yeah.
say, it probably means you're going to have to be looking a little bit closer at each job description just to see whether this is exactly what you want.
Yes, I mean, certainly if you put the term cost draftsman into LinkedIn, you will get hundreds and hundreds of pages of people doing that role. But if you actually drill down into the job titles, that'll be very, very different.
This is obviously a really interesting area, because I think one of the things that often people don't appreciate, and maybe even us as paralegals we don't always appreciate, is just how many different types of job you can do as a paralegal. As you say, as a paralegal you might be a cost draftsman, but equally as a paralegal you can then get an extra qualification and become a costs lawyer. And these are all things I think that we sort of don't appreciate, is the opportunities that are there, really, and the different kind of sectors that we can work in. So thank you for that, because I think that's helped clear up. I didn't even know what they were, so I'm really grateful that you've explained that, and hopefully it's also inspired some people to think, oh, that actually really appeals to me. That's an area I'd like to go into. So I'm just going to check, is there any questions from anybody? Because we'd obviously love to answer them. Nigel?
What's the cost of becoming a costs lawyer? So cost of qualifications, cost of membership, do they need professional indemnity insurance, all of that sort of stuff?
So the cost varies depending on your prior qualifications. So depending on what your previous studies are, you may be exempt from part or all of year one, and that will kind of determine what your fees are. The course costs in the region of about £7,000, but that depends very much on the profile of the student in terms of what they've done previously. Whilst you are studying with us, you become a student member of the Association of Costs Lawyers, so the membership fee is included in the cost of the training, and then you get a reduced sub, I think, for the first year after you qualify. You don't need to have professional indemnity insurance whilst you're studying, but you would, if you qualified as a cost lawyer.
How long would it take you to qualify?
So the course takes, if you have to do the full course, it takes 2 years. The course is studied part-time and online. The period of qualifying experience is also 2 years. So depending on your circumstances, that will determine the length of time that it actually takes you to qualify. So some students are able to run their qualifying experience concurrently with doing the course itself. So, it takes them kind of around 2 years, possibly less if they've got exemptions and they're already well established in the cost role. Some people, you can do your qualifying experience after you've completed the course, and that would, accordingly elongate the amount of time it takes to qualify.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. We don't have any more questions, and I think what that tells us is we've covered everything that was important to cover, which is always a good thing. So thank you so much, Madeleine. If you're interested in becoming a costs lawyer or would like to find out more, then do visit the Association of Costs Lawyers training website, and that'll be able to answer any questions that you've got. Definitely an interesting area to look at if you're already a paralegal, maybe working in that area, or would like to see yourself having that as another string to your bow, let's say, something like that. Definitely worth checking out. So thank you very much. That's Madeleine Jenness, who's Head of Business at the Association of Costs Lawyers Training. Thank you so much for joining us today and filling us in, and definitely enlightening us on a role, I said, that I think a lot of people probably are not even aware exists unless they're already working in that area. I don't think it's a well-known thing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Well, so we've got more webinars coming up, so do keep a lookout for emails coming through in the future for our future webinars. And thank you again to Madeleine and to everyone else for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks a lot then.